Good morning. I hereby call to order this 16th meeting of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission for the year 2018. And I normally ask you all to stand for the pledge, but I want to request that you remain seated for this time. I would like to turn it over to Vice Chairman Place for a few comments.
Thank you very much. This Veterans Day, the centenary of the armistice of the ending of World War I, is also a stark reminder of the defensive principles that called forward such immeasurable sacrifices. President Lincoln's words, not far from here, from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last measure of devotion, that we have here highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain. In 2017, I wrote words to deliver from this bench, speaking out against the federal ban on travel from Iran, Syria, Yemen, Libya, and Somalia, a policy inexplicable other than by an animus towards Muslims. I chose not to speak those words, and I deeply regret that. Last week's murders of innocents in Pittsburgh, in a community that I know well and love, by a man with hatred stoked by irrational victimhood and grievance, compels me to speak today. The Talmud tells us, Shitaka kehudat dumia, silence is assent. Elie Wiesel wrote that the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. The opposite of life is not death, it is indifference. Pittsburgh and Charleston and Orlando and San Bernardino and Sutherland Springs and Charlottesville and Newtown, and each Veterans Day remind us of the obligation and necessity of memory. Wiesel wrote in his 1986 Nobel lecture, "If anything can, it is memory that can save humanity. For me, hope without memory is like memory without hope." He continued, "A recollection, the time after the war, the place, Paris. A young man struggles to readjust to life. His mother, his father, his small sister are gone. He is alone and on the verge of despair, and yet he does not give up. To the contrary, he strives to find a place among the living. He acquires a new language. He makes a few friends who, like himself, believe that the memory of evil will serve as a shield against evil, that the memory of death will serve as a shield against death. For us, forgetting was never an option. Remembering is a noble and necessary act. The call of memory, the call to memory, reaches us from the very dawn of history. No commandment figures so frequently, so insistently in the Bible. It is incumbent upon us to remember the good we have received and the evil we have suffered. And yet it is surely human to forget, even to want to forget. Indeed, if memory helps us to survive, forgetting allows us to go on living. After the war, we reassured ourselves that it would be enough to relate a single night in Treblinka, to tell of the cruelty, the senselessness of murder, and the outrage born of indifference. It would be enough to find the right word and the propitious moment to say it, to shake humanity out of its indifference, and to keep the torturer from torturing ever again. We thought it would be enough to read the world a poem written by a child in the Theresienstadt ghetto to ensure that no child anywhere would ever again have to endure hunger or fear. It would be enough to describe a death camp selection to prevent the human right of dignity from ever being violated again. We thought it would be enough to tell of the tidal wave of hatred which broke over the Jewish people, for men everywhere to decide once and for all to put an end to hatred of anyone who is different, whether black or white, Jew or Arab, Christian or Muslim, anyone whose orientation differs politically, philosophically, sexually. A naive undertaking? Of course, but not without a certain logic. Have we failed? I often think we have. If someone had told us in 1945 that in our lifetime religious wars would rage in virtually every continent, that thousands of children would once again be dying of starvation, we would not have believed it. Or that racism and fanaticism would flourish once again, and we would not have believed it. How to explain this defeat of memory? And here we come back to memory. We must remember the suffering of my people as we must remember that of the Ethiopians, the Cambodians, the Boat people, Palestinians, the Mesquite Indians. Because I remember, I despair. Because I remember, I have the duty to reject despair. I remember the killers, I remember the victims. even as I struggle to invent 1,001 reasons to hope. There may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest. The Talmud tells us by saving a single human life, man can save the world. Mankind must remember that peace is not God's gift to his creatures, it is a gift to each other. Please stand, if you may, and please join the commission in a minute of silence, reflection on those who were injured. City of Pittsburgh responding officers, Daniel Mead, Michael Smidga, Anthony Burke, Timothy Matson, congregants, Andrea Wedner, Danielle Laguerre, and on the lives lost, Joyce Feinberg, Richard Gottfried, Rose Mallinger, Jerry Rabinowitz, brothers David and Cecil Rosenthal, Daniel Stein, husband and wife Bernice and Sylvan Simon, Melvin Wax, and Irvin Younger. Thank you. Thank you.
I do apologize. If we could all remain standing, we're going to ask April Stover, who is from the Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement and a U.S. Marine veteran, to lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much, April. Before we move on to our agenda, just want to make our normal safety announcement and know that the instructions, if there's a reason to leave the room, are in the inside cover of your agenda. Our first matter of this morning's agenda is the approval of the minutes for October 4th, 2018. And I call upon Vice Chairman Place, who is the editor.
Thank you. I reviewed the minutes of October 14, 2018 public meeting and move that they be approved as submitted.
You have heard the motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second? Second. Second by Commissioner Kennard. Any discussion, any further edits? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0. Next, we will move on to our agenda. Call upon our Secretary Rosemary Chiavetta, to lead us through today's agenda.
Good morning, Madam Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Your various offices and bureaus have prepared the following agenda for your consideration. Therefore, let us begin on page 1 with matters presented by Director Sophie and the Office of Special Assistants. It is recommended in an omnibus motion that the Commission adopt all of the items on page 1, beginning with the settlement agreement regarding handy delivery, and continuing on page 2 to include both items ending with the application of the Connections Group.
Is there a motion to adopt the staff recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Kennard, second by Commissioner Coleman. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0.
Turning to page 3, it is recommended that the Commission adopt the proposed opinion and order in the complaint of Thomas Baker versus Pico Energy Company.
Is there a motion to call up the matter for consideration?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. Motion by Commissioner Kennard, second by Commissioner Sweet. Any discussion?
Chairman, I do have a motion on this matter.
Commissioner Coleman.
Thank you. I'd ask that my motion be entered into the record as though I read it in its entirety. Before the Commission for disposition are exceptions filed to the initial decision dismissing the above captioned formal complaint filed against PECO Energy Company. The complainant is a commercial customer who alleged that PECO did not provide reasonable service in response to a hot socket meter alarm occurring at his property. The complainant also alleged that PECO's request for a security deposit constituted unreasonable service. Upon review of the evidentiary record, I find no merit or basis to the complainant's allegations of bias that were raised in his exceptions. Moreover, I agree in the initial decision that the complainant did not meet the burden of proof here. Therefore, I move that the complainant's exceptions be denied consistent with this motion, the initial decision be adopted consistent with this motion, and the Office of Special Assistance prepare an opinion in order consistent with this motion. Thank you.
You have heard the motion of Commissioner Coleman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Kennard. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0. There's no objection. We'll take the previous roll call on the matter as amended. Seeing no objection, the matter as amended passes 5-0.
It is recommended that the Commission adopt the proposed opinion in order in the complaint of K.A. at Fairless Hills versus the PECO Energy Company.
Is there a motion to call up the matter for consideration?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
Motion by Commissioner Kennard, second by Commissioner Coleman. Any discussion?
Madam Chair, I have a motion.
Commissioner Sweet.
Right. Thank you. Would you please place my motion upon the record as if I'd read it in its entirety? Before the Commission of the exceptions of PECO Energy Company to the initial decision of Administrative Law Judge Aranda Vero, in a formal complaint filed by K.A. at Fairless Hills, LP. After purchasing a then vacant grocery store in January of 2016, K.A. contacted PECO to have the electric service placed in its name in order to keep the lights and sprinkler system operational. A PECO employee asked K.A. about rate schedule selection, and the K.A. employee who made the call asked that everything be kept, quote, as is, period, close quote. Or excuse me, strike the period, comma, close quote, until a supervisor from K.A. could get back to PECO for a discussion. The rate in place was a contract rate for a set minimum usage, which PECO then reserves, instead of a rate which is measured and charged for the actual usage. The Public Utility Code requires a utility that has more than one rate applicable to a customer to apply the rate that is most advantageous to the customer. Applying that principle, the initial decision of the administrative law judge finds that PECO should have changed the rate unilaterally when the new owners took over. However, PECO's approved tariff requires it to maintain an existing rate until it is changed with the customer's consent. Here, the customer asked that everything be kept as is until another employee contacted PECO to discuss rates. The initial as-is conversation took place in January of 2016. The later specific request by KA to review the rates did not occur until July of 2016. PECO's application of the existing rate schedule, until notified that conditions were such that a different rate schedule would be more advantageous, is consistent with applicable law. It is the customer's responsibility to initiate the discussion, and once that happens, the utility must respond. Therefore, PECO should not be required to reimburse KA for the higher rate until the July request and communication. But after that date, PECO should reimburse KA for the difference in rates for the time between the customer's request and the application of the new rates. Moreover, there is no compelling evidence to support the imposition of the civil penalty included in the recommended decision, or excuse me, the initial decision. Therefore, I move that the initial decision of the administrative law judge is reversed, consistent with this motion, that PECO Energy reimburse or credit the account of KA for the difference between the rate HT and the rate GS for the time period from July 13th, 2016 to the application of rate GS. Thirdly, that the Office of Special Assistance prepare an appropriate opinion in order consistent with this motion. Thank you.
You have heard the motion of Commissioner Sweet. Is there a second?
Second?
Second by Vice Chairman Place. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0. On the matter as amended, if there's no objection, we'll take the previous roll call. Seeing no objection, the matter as amended passes 5-0.
Turning to page 4, it is recommended that the commission adopt in an omnibus motion all of the items on page 4, beginning with the complaint by the Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement versus Mill Creek Paramedic Service, and continuing on page 5 to include all of the items on page 5, ending with the complaint of the Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement versus David Saul.
Is there a motion to adopt staff recommendations?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Vice Chairman Place, second by Commissioner Kennard. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0.
Turning to page 6, and matters presented by Director Diskin and the Bureau of Technical Utility Services. It is recommended in an omnibus motion that the commission adopt all of the items on page 6, beginning with the letter petition of the Metropolitan Edison and Pennsylvania Electric Companies, and continuing to include all of the items on page 7, and both items on page 8, ending with the application of Brookfield Renewable.
Is there a motion to adopt staff recommendations?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Coleman, second by Commissioner Sweet. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0.
Turning to page 9, and matters presented by Chief Counsel Panque and the Law Bureau. It is recommended that the commission adopt the proposed policy statement on third-party electric vehicle charging.
Is there a motion to adopt staff recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Sweet, second by Commissioner Coleman. Any discussion? I do have a statement that I would place on the record in its entirety, but it's such a good statement, I'm going to read the whole thing anyway. Today, the Commission acts to finalize policies which foster regulatory clarity for the Commonwealth's electric vehicle charging industry. Furthermore, we take a large step toward designing a regulatory landscape which supports innovative and dynamic pricing for electric vehicle charging. The Commission does so via a policy statement announcing that third-party charging stations are not subject to resale, redistribution, pricing restrictions, and by advising electric distribution companies to codify this policy into their respective tariffs. I am pleased to take this action today as I believe it will work to facilitate progress in the Commonwealth's burgeoning electric vehicle landscape. Additionally, the Commission's action today supports tariff provisions requiring customers to notify electric distribution companies of any planned build-out of electric vehicle charging stations. Technological advancements, including the advent of electric vehicles, are transforming the electric consumption profiles of customers and the grid as a whole. As such, it is of paramount importance that the electric utilities be able to adapt their infrastructure to support this transformation in an economic manner. These tariff provisions will work to enhance a utility's informational awareness and thus support more efficient distribution system planning. I look forward to reviewing the tariff filings made pursuant to the Commission's action today. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0.
Continuing on page 9, it is recommended that the commission adopt in an omnibus motion the remaining 2 items on page 9.
Is there a motion to adopt the staff recommendations?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Kennard, second by Commissioner Coleman. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0.
Turning to page 10, It is recommended that the Commission adopt the proposed policy statement regarding the reporting of intrastate operating revenues by jurisdictional telecommunications carriers.
Is there a motion to adopt the staff recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Kennard, second by Commissioner Coleman. Any discussion?
I have a statement on the matter.
Vice Chairman Place.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, I ask that my statement be entered into the record as if I read it in its entirety. Before us for disposition is the staff recommendation for the issuance of a proposed policy statement regarding the potential fiscal assessment under Section 510 of the Public Utility Code of special access service revenues where relevant special access circuits are classified as interstate under currently applicable Federal Communications Commission regulations. This policy statement would also apply to other similar jurisdictionally mixed telecommunications services and their respective providers that operated under this Commission's jurisdiction. The policy statement introduces the concept of the de facto intrastate operating revenues for such jurisdictionally mixed services that can be subject to this Commission's fiscal assessments under Section 510 to include revenue derived from special access circuits and services that have been classified as interstate under the FCC's 10% contamination rule. This would affect the gross intrastate revenue reporting for fiscal assessment purposes of various providers of jurisdictionally mixed special access services or other similar services, including competitive access providers, competitive local exchange carriers, and incumbent local exchange carriers. These providers do or may classify special access circuits and corresponding services as totally interstate under the FCC's 10% contamination rule. Consequently, although these providers furnish jurisdictionally mixed services within this Commonwealth under the regulatory oversight of this Commission, their relevant federally classified special access service revenues are not currently reported for intrastate physical assessment purposes under Section 510. The concept of the de facto gross intrastate operating revenues includes, quote, those operating revenues that are billed, charged, or otherwise due for all telecommunications services and traffic between points that are both located within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, unquote. State fiscal assessments, such as those that are imposed and calculated under Section 510, are used for the funding of legitimate regulatory oversight operations of state utility regulatory agencies, including this Commission. As such, they have a different purpose than revenue assessments that are designated via statute and/or regulation for the funding of the federal and state universal service fund mechanisms. However, the federal and state USF mechanism assessments still follow certain jurisdictional separation guidelines that specifically categorize assessable intrastate and intrastate revenues. Similarly, such jurisdictional separation and corresponding revenue classification is factored into the calculation of federal regulatory fees that are charged by the FCC for its own regulatory operations. Consequently, I encourage the participating parties, the various categories of telecommunications carriers and communications providers, as well as their respective associations, to provide comments that are supported by applicable legal rationales and appropriate technical explanations and address the following areas. 1, whether and in what fashion existing jurisdictional separations rules are implicated in implementing the proposed policy statement. 2, whether the format and content of the Commission's annual fiscal assessment report should be modified so that it contains greater specificity on the reportable de facto revenues, including information and data on special access revenues that are classified as intrastate under the FCC's 10% contamination rule. And 3, whether the Commission should initiate a formal collaborative process between its staff and the interested parties and entities in order to address this potential change of reportable revenues for Section 510 fiscal assessment purposes. For the above referenced reasons, I will be respectfully concurring result only on the issuance of the proposed policy statement. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
And concurring the result only.
The motion passes 5-0, noting that Vice Chairman Place will be concurring in result only.
Turning to page 11, in matters presented by Chief ALJ Rainey and the Office of Administrative Law Judge, it is recommended that the Commission adopt ALJ Dunderdale's recommended decision in the rate proposal of the Timberley Valley Sanitation Company.
Is there a motion to adopt the staff recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Kennard, second by Commissioner Sweet. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0.
Madam Chairman, that concludes the regular agenda. Turning to the carry-in agenda. On page 1, it is recommended by the Law Bureau that consistent with 52 PA Code, Section 3.3C, the notational vote regarding Affinity, Pennsylvania, be recorded and entered in the minutes of the public meeting.
Is there a motion to adopt the staff recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Kennard, second by Commissioner Sweet. Any discussion?
As a verbal statement on the matter, ma'am.
Vice Chairman, please.
Thank you. I'm voting in the affirmative to record the notational vote taken by the Commission via Secretary letter issued on October 31, 2018, noting my dissent from the disposition of the underlying matter. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-0.
It should be noted that the second item on page 1 has been postponed to the public meeting of December 6th. Madam Chairman and Commissioners, that concludes all agenda items for consideration today.
Thank you very much. Before we gavel out of today's meeting, I do want to recognize Commissioner Coleman on our inaugural meeting of our Damage Prevention Committee.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I got to say, it is quite a delight to share with you this morning that yesterday we did have the inaugural meeting of the Damage Prevention Committee. As many of you know that have been in the audience for many years, this was a 7.5-year journey that culminated with the first meeting yesterday. And I got to tell you, it went flawlessly. The Damage Prevention Committee did a wonderful job. We had a room full of people here for the first meeting. And I just wanted to take a moment to share with you, as some of you certainly recognize, that these are efforts that don't come without a whole lot of effort on the part of the team within this commission. And I just wanted to give a shout out to a couple of those units within the Public Utility Commission that really stepped up on this matter. We had a implementation team within the commission that was comprised of the various bureaus that would be touching the One Call program, and they really did a fabulous job in taking us from the legislation through an implementation process to the point that we were ready to go live here with the Damage Prevention Committee. We had a group of Damage Prevention Committee members, a collection of 13 members of the Damage Prevention Committee that, to the best of my knowledge, never really had this kind of interaction before. And I know that Phil Woods is in the audience today, one of the Damage Prevention Committee members, and I want to acknowledge Phil and others that they did a wonderful job in coming together and adjudicating about 80 cases yesterday. And this is no easy feat when you realize the personalities and the diverse personalities and expertise in having them come together to be able to make those decisions. And by the way, that was a unique committee. This is the first committee, as I understand it, at this commission where we have charged a committee with the ability to adjudicate these kinds of cases and a large quantity of these cases over the years. So I think they did a fabulous job in getting started. There's a whole lot of effort that goes on behind the scenes to get us to that point. And I wanted to recognize Rick Kanaski and his team. This is where the Damage Prevention Committee activity is housed within this commission. And the chair of the Damage Prevention Committee is part of Rick's group, the supervisor and the investigators that do all the legwork that bring those cases for the Damage Prevention Committee. And so I wanted to thank Rick and his team for doing an exceptionally good job yesterday. The final group I did want to recognize is our communications team. And, it's remarkable to see how this works behind the scenes. There is a huge investment that has been made to get us to this point, and part of that is in the technology, not just the human capital that's gotten us to this point, but the technology that is in this room and is interfacing with the One Call organization in West Mifflin and has the ability to pull information into the commission for the investigators to do their work. And at the same time, we have our communications group that is behind these doors and is making all of this work, making all the technology work, from all of the testifiers that are coming before the Damage Prevention Committee, for the investigators to be able to present these cases. It's a pretty remarkable exercise. And so I wanted to give a shout out to Tom Charles and all of the communication folks for doing a fabulous job. It is streamed live, so if you happen to miss it, you can go on to the PUC website and you can see the inaugural meeting of the Damage Prevention Committee, and you can join them every month going forward if you'd like to, and it will be streamed live. So thank you to all of the teams for making us shine again, and look forward to the next meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Coleman, for your comments. It was a great day yesterday, and I too want to concur in the comments that he made in terms of our staff and the excellent job that they have done. But I also want to recognize him, Commissioner Coleman, who has taken many, many years out of his life to get us to where we are today, probably about over 7.5 years. So we want to thank him also for all of his hard work.
Thank you.
Chairman, I also want to weigh in and thank everybody, including, I'm glad you said something about Commissioner Coleman. I mean, what a thrill. This has gone from a incipient idea to a legislation and numerous printers numbers over the course of a long period of time. And Commissioner Coleman really stuck with it and pulled together a legislative compromise that at some points seemed that would not ever happen. And then having turned it over to the staff, you guys just did a tremendous job yesterday. I was so impressed by the professionalism and the polish, how well staged the whole thing was. The committee members were good, but damn, our commission staff was good too. You guys were there, had answers, moved things forward if information was needed. It was flawless. It was just at your fingertips. So thanks to everybody. Kudos to those that started this. Kudos to those that have effectuated this. It reflects very well, I think, on our commission, and we thank you.
There's nothing else to come before the commission in terms of our business. I would ask that you remain for our annual Veterans Day observation, which will occur after we gavel out. So if there's no objection, the meeting is adjourned.